Today's video, we're going to be putting 4 piston calipers, SRT calipers, on a narrow body RT. I just finished the driver's side. Has an SRT knuckle because where the caliper mounts is about 1 inch thick compared to the RT's 3/4 inch thick. But here it is completed. Now I just got to bleed them once I do all 4. Let's go ahead and knock out the passenger side. So what you're going to need are SRT knuckles. Right there you can see your SRT 4 piston calipers, the rotors that match, and then the brake line for the Brembos. And once you have all 4, it's a direct swap on everything. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take off the caliper and the caliper mount as one piece. And to do that, you're going to need to take off this 21 upper mount, this 21mm lower mount. And here's a difference, very minor difference, but to take off the knuckle, all you got is a 19mm up top and then 3 21s down on the bottom. You have the lower control arm that's on the top end, 21mm on the bottom, and then you got your tie rod that's 21mm. Next, I'm going to take off the lower control arm, 21mm. $10mm for the ABS sensor. You can use a hammer to punch the lower control arm, the tension rod out. I got this ball joint press or unpresser. Or 5mm Allen key that holds the stud. And here you go. Here's your RT knuckle. So this RT knuckle, this mount is about 3/4. If you look at this SRT one knuckle, it's about a 1 inch mount. Alright, so this is for the passenger. This is learning from what I did on the driver's side. I'm pre-installing the brake line. So this is the orientation for the passenger. I'm installing this because I wasted a lot of fluid on the driver's side because I was trying to fight this bolt when this was mounted up, and I hard mounted this already. So I'm pre-installing this for minimal fluid loss, and all I got to do is transfer the hard line into this one. We're going to go and throw the knuckle on the top controller. And there you go. Here's how you put the Brembos on the front. What I had to do that I didn't record was the ABS line. Just transfer those little clips on the brake hose that follow it. And then you add that bracket that holds the brake line here. And then you tighten your upper ball joint. And you're good to go. Now let's do the rears. On to the rears. It's a little bit more complicated, a lot more control arms or arms attached to it. Your rear tow arm, sway bar end link, upper control arm, your traction rod, on your lower bucket bolt right there, and then another traction rod right there. So you just got a bunch of different arms attached to it. First thing we're going to do, same thing as the front, take off the caliper, and caliper mount is one assembly. Alright, the caliper mounts are two 18 millimeters, one up top and one on bottom. And go ahead and take off the rotor. Right here we got a 16 millimeter on the back and a 15 millimeter on the front. This upper control arm is an 18 millimeter front and back. Alright, this front upper traction bar is 18 on the head and the nut. The axle nut is a 32 millimeter. It was rusted, so I scraped it off with the wire brush, put some penetrating fluid on there. Now I'm going to use an impact. If you don't have an impact, you got to do this with the wheel on and or someone holding the brakes. So let's knock that up. And to take off the axle nut, or the axle, I have a air chisel or air gun. If you don't have one, you're gonna have to use a hammer, but you gotta be very careful you don't damage the threads and or the nut to make sure that you can put this back on. If you're gonna have to sacrifice the nut, make sure the nut is a little bit out so you save the threads on the actual axle. The rear tow arm is an 18 millimeter nut and bolt. What we're going to do now is we're going to take off the wheel bearing. It's held on by 4 E14s, external 14s. So you can look like that. And there's on the back side. So we'll make sure the axle is removed so you have space to move the axle up and down to get to those the bolts. You didn't see it because it just fell out, but the bearing just pulls right out. It does only go one specific way. These two narrow bolt holes go up to the top, and then the wider ones go on the bottom. To take off this parking brake bracket, it is a T30. And once we take this off, we'll have to pull off the end that connects to the whole parking brake assembly. Once you pull the backing plate dust shield from the knuckle, you'll expose the end of the parking brake assembly. Right here, you just pull on it far enough to where you can unhinge. It's a little square hole that wraps onto a hook. So you just gotta unhook that, and I'll show you how it looks like once I get it off. So as you can see here, here's a parking brake cable that goes through the whole knuckle. This little square hooks onto that hook right there. So when you put the new parking brake assembly back on the new knuckle, you just gotta pry out that little hook to then go inside this square hole or square slot. And the last two things we're gonna take off is this 12mm Allen key bolt that holds the lower control arm through this hole. And here's a nut and this bottom traction rod. The last one for the 18mm nut and bolt for the lower traction rod. And then here comes the knuckle. And the reason why we're swapping knuckles is you can see here's the RT mounting for the caliper bracket, and here are for the Brembos. So that's why we're swapping the knuckle. Alright, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the caliper with the hose. Up here there's a bracket that holds on. There's a 10mm behind here. I'll show you that right now. And the line that goes into it is a 13mm B nut. So we got to unscrew that, and then we got to take off the 10mm nut that holds this bracket, which holds this whole assembly on. This one's going to be hard to record, so just take my word for it. Alright, so to put this knuckle in, I'm going to first line up this lower traction rod with also the lower control arm that fits in here. It's going to be a finagle, but it should be easy. This little sleeve that's in here, you have to make sure you press it in with an air hammer or socket and punch through this hole right here. I'm going to fight going into this lower bushing if not. So you have to make sure you press this little sleeve lip back in, and then once you tighten the nut and bolt, it'll squeeze it back out. So now what we'll do is push on this lever right here, which is this hook, and try to place it onto the parking brake cable. When you put the parking brake assembly like loose fitted, what you're gonna fight is the dust shield. It doesn't want to seat this lower right side on the passenger to seat against the knuckle. You just have to like finagle the shield to go around this parking brake like bracket assembly. But once you do, it's gonna be butted up against it, and now you can just go ahead and put your wheel bearing in. 2 narrow holes on top and the wider ones on the bottom, and then the 4 E14s in the back. When you're putting in the bolts, the 4 E14s, just make sure the axle is loose. You don't have like the nut and all, because you're gonna have to move the axle when you're tightening all 4 just to maneuver it around, FYI. Now with the rotor on, we're going to throw the caliper on. And then once you put that brake line on, you have your caliper installed. Now we just got to bleed all four, but that's going to be tomorrow's job. This is how you install the rear calipers. Alright, I didn't record the bleeding process. You could just look it up on how to bleed brakes and everything, but here you go. Here's how the Brembos look on an RT. And that's how you replace Brembos on an RT. Hopefully this video helps you. Y'all have a good one.